This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so just to do a recap on what we are doing the other day when we before closed is that we were looking into the Azure DevOps pipeline documentation and we were understanding how to design something known as a YAML pipeline. And I said that right now YAML is gaining a lot of popularity, and that's the reason we are going towards the YAML. And we also discussed about what are the advantages of going into a YAML pipeline and so on and so forth. And we started with something called as a trigger. So we went ahead and we defined something known as a trigger, wherein we just said it is none, meaning I said it is a manual release or it is a manual trigger out here. Then we defined something called as a stage. And under the stage, we mentioned a single stage release pipeline called build, wherein I said, okay, fine, I want to build my code firstly. And inside a stage, I went ahead and declared something called as a job. And inside a job, I went ahead and declared something called as as let's say a step. And inside a step, I went ahead and declared something called as a task. So this is the flow diagram on what we are doing, on how we are doing, and etc. So let's go back to our pipeline and let's quickly verify what we did till now and what we want to do starting from now. So let me go, let's say, into the pipelines. And this is the pipeline that I was interacting with. And let's say if I edit this out. So this is where I mentioned my trigger. So I started the trigger. Let me close this. I started my trigger. This is where I mentioned with the trigger that I was doing. Secondly, I said that there is a stage which is called code building stage. So I said there is one unique stage out here under which there are jobs which will help me build my code. And I said the name is display name is build. Then I said the variables here I need are these two things, the build configuration and the build platform. These are the two variables what I declared. So these are the variables. And then I went into the job, and inside the job I declared my pool. I said, okay, fine. The pool that I want to use is a Windows latest pool. And then I said, okay, fine, the steps. And then I started mentioning something like .NET Restore, the .NET Build, .NET Publish. I'm also copying the artifacts out here. And then finally, I'm doing a publish. And as and when I do a publish, the artifacts are going to look something like this. So if I go in here and if I look at my artifact, these are the two artifacts that are getting published out here. One being the .NET Core.zip. The other is a webapp.json file. So one being the code file, or one being the code compilation file, which is a .zip format. The other being a webapp.json file. So these are the two things that are getting produced out of my build pipeline out here. Any questions till here, guys? Anything that I can take till here before I move forward? Okay, so until now, I just did a build. Okay, I only started to do a build pipeline using the YAML format. I also want to make sure to go for a release, meaning I want to add another stage. A stage is the one which will go ahead and, let's say, help me achieve whatever I want to. In this case, I added one stage which is called a code building stage, wherein I built my code. I want to go ahead and add another stage called as a release stage, which will go ahead and release my code. And I want to do an infrastructure as a code here, meaning I have my ARM template. I want to first build my infrastructure, and then I want to deploy the code onto the infrastructure that I created. So I'm just building a very simple Azure web app. So if you look at the repository that I have, I just copied this file from the infra folder. I just copied a file called webapp.json. This is the JSON file that I do have, wherein it's just going ahead and building a very simple web application out here. And I want to build this out, meaning I want to release it out right now. I built everything till here. So this is the first stage wherein I built everything. Now I'd like to add one more stage here, And this stage is called now as a release stage, and I want to release it onto the development environment. So as and when I do a hyphen and then a space, this stages is an array which can contain multiple stages. I'm seeing a stage and I'll call this as a development stage, meaning I want to now release my code into the development stage, or I want to do a development environment right now. And I'll just do an enter here. I'll get my cursor back again under the stages. I'm doing a control space and I'll now define the jobs. So under the stage, I'm defining a job, and this time I want to define a deployment job. This is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing differently from what I did in build. In build, I just mentioned this as a job and then started to give my job name and etc. In the release phase, in the release cycle, I want to give this as a deployment job. I'll say it as deployment, and under this is where I'll start mentioning things like, let's say, firstly my pool. So I'm telling that, okay, fine, I want this to be, or I want to use a pool, and I would say something like VM image is Windows latest. So I'm using the latest Windows image for this particular pool, and I want to give a name to this particular job, or I want to give a name for this particular stage, and I will say something like display name. I will just give the name of the environment. So I'll say it is development. So I'm giving a display name called development, and this is a very important variable, guys, or this is a very important parameter that I'm mentioning right now. This is called environment, and I'm saying it is development. Now let me explain what is this environment about. We'll talk about this, but for now I'm just giving the name called environment out here, and this stage is especially important because it contains a lot of variables. Like for example, I have a web app name that is not declared. I have an app service name that is not declared. I have a resource group name that is not declared. So all these are again very important. So that's the reason what I'm doing is that I want to make sure to keep all these variables inside a variable group. This is something that we were talking about. So I said common library dev. So let me see what is the name of the variables out here. So I have all the variables out here: the ASP name, the environment, the RG name, the web app, and etc. So this is the variable group that I want to use. So what I'll do here is that I won't declare now an individual variable. Rather, rather I will start declaring something called as variables, and inside this, now I'm going to give a flag. I'm not going to declare an individual variable. I'm going to give a flag called, let's say, let's see this. Am I not getting any suggestions? Let's see. I'm giving an indentation saying hyphen group. So I'm saying the name of the group that I want to use here is this common library hyphen dev, which I already had, which we did for a couple of demos. So I'm giving the name of the variable group, getting the cursor here. So I'm saying the name of the variable group instead of passing the individual variable. I'm saying the name of the variable group out here is dev. And since this is a deployment, I need to mention something known as a deployment strategy, for which I'll just get my cursor back here again and I'll say strategy. And I just want to declare a strategy, a very simple strategy called run once. This is the strategy that I want to deploy. Then I will say, yes, I want to deploy right now. And this is where I'll start mentioning my steps. This is where I'll now start mentioning my steps. And the first step that I want to actually go ahead and declare is that whatever artifacts are getting produced in the above stage, this one, whatever artifacts are getting produced here, I want to go ahead and download the artifacts inside this phase. I want to explicitly download the artifacts into this particular phase. So the first step that I'll be declaring here is to download the artifacts. So I'll just open my assistant and I'll say download artifacts. So I'm saying download build artifact, and I'm saying I want to download it from the current build, which is okay. And I want to download the specific artifact. And here the name of the artifact is a drop. And I will say I want to download everything into something called as system.artifacts directory. So I'm saying, okay, fine. I want to basically go ahead and download it from system.artifacts directory. And this is again a predefined Azure DevOps variable. If we look at Azure DevOps predefined variables, and if I do Control F and search for this system or artifacts directory, let's see, facts. It's, it's another name for the build.artifacts staging directory. I can also give this as system.artifacts directory. I can also go ahead and do that. And let me come back here, and I can also say the specific build pipeline, and I can give the name of the build pipeline directly. So this is the project, and I can directly tell that this is the name of the build pipeline, which is YAML build pipeline. And I'll say this is the latest build that I have, meaning whatever the latest version of the artifact is, please go ahead and download it out. I can also give this, I can also do this, and I'm saying please download all the artifacts into this particular folder called system.artifacts directory, into this particular folder here called system.artifacts staging directory, and please make sure to place your cursor under the step and say add. So I'm now adding something called as the artifacts. Now I'm basically going ahead and saying I'm adding a step here essentially called download the artifacts out here. So I want to download all my artifacts into something known as a system.artifacts directory, and I'll just give a display name to it so that it'll make it easy for me to differentiate at a later point in time. I'll say the display name, sorry, I'll say the display name here is something like download artifacts. I'm just giving a display name called download artifacts. And after I download the artifact, now this is how my release pipeline actually looks like. So if I did a classic release pipeline, this is the .NET application release that we were looking at. And I had multiple stages, and under each and every stage I went ahead and added a task group, of course. So let me manage this out. And under this, I just have the infrastructure creation and the deployment of the code on the created infrastructure. These are the two things that I did. In the same logic, I'll go ahead and now use another task. I'll make sure my cursor is there under this particular under this particular task out here, and I will say ARM. I have an ARM template deployment. I'll use the Azure Resource Manager connection. I'll say the subscription is something like Azure classes. The name of the resource group is something that is already declared in my, let's say, in the libraries out here. So I'm using the library. So this is the name of the variable that I declared, which is the RG name. Just copying this out. I'm saying dollar $RG name. This is what the name of the resource group is. And I'm just giving a location like East US2. I'm just taking this location to build to build the infrastructure in. And here is where it's asking me where exactly your template is. So in the first step, I'm just downloading all my artifacts into this location called system.artifact directory, right? So I'll just take this. I'll say my template is here, inside which I have a file called webapp.json. So inside this, there will be ideally a folder called drop. Inside the drop, I will have a file called webapp.json, which has a couple of parameters out here, like the app service name, ASP name, and the web app name. So I'll just declare these two parameters which are needed by my template. So I'll say override template parameters, and I'll say ASP name is nothing but the name of the app service name that I declared here. So it is ASP plan name, and the name of the web app is something that I declared in this template, which is web app name. So I'll put it here and I'll say web app name, whatever is there in my library. So I'm just taking this out called web app name and I'm giving it here. These are the parameters I'm overriding, and this is how I'm declaring my template in something known as YAML. So once I declare this out, before I adding it, I want to make sure my cursor is here and I'll say add. Now I am doing a resource manager deployment. I'm doing a template deployment right now, inside which I'm now going to give something like a display name, and I'll say ARM template deployment. Finally, my template is deployed, and the second thing that I want to do is the app service deployment. So this is where I'll add something so I'll just get my cursor back again out here. Let me just collapse this and let me get my cursor here manually. Try doing that. So I want to make sure that my cursor is right under this task, and this is where I'll say Azure Web App Deploy. So Azure App Service Deploy. I'm selecting the service connection out here. I'm saying the app service name again is from the library, which is web app name. So it is dollar web app name is something that I'll declare here. Just dollar web app name. And now it's telling where is your package. So my package will be downloaded again into something known as the system.artifact directory. So I'll say this is system.artifact directory. I'll say drop and I'll say .zip file. So whatever is the pattern, I don't care. Just go into this particular folder and download this artifact called .zip, and please go ahead and deploy the same thing. So I want to again make sure that my cursor is here reflecting here. I'll say add. So I'm now using another task to just go ahead and deploy me something called as the code into the app service. So I'll say the display name here is web app deployment. So I'm making sure to do all these things out. So now my entire stage, my entire pipeline looks something like this. Firstly, I'm building all my code. So I'm saying I'm using a stage here to build the code. Secondly, I'm using another stage. Still here, the code build is done. All this is my code build. If I come down now, I'm releasing my code onto an environment called development, and I'm using something like the Windows latest image. And here I'm using a variable group. And then finally, I'm adding multiple steps. And the first step is called download the artifact. And I have added all these things out here. Now I'll just save. I'll say commit directly onto the develop branch. That's fine. And I will give it a run. And this will throw an error if your pipeline is not properly designed. So this is not throwing me an error right now, and I'll say run. So I'm now doing a run, and my pipeline looks something like this right now. It's doing a build, then it's doing a deployment. So initially my pipeline was just looking as the build, so it was only doing a build there. Now I am doing two things, one being a build, the other being a deployment into the development stage. Telling okay, fine, I'll do a deployment and it'll take some time to go ahead and get the agent, and it'll now start doing the build, and then it'll start doing the deployment. This is the multi-stage pipeline that I have right now. And going further, this is just one stage. I just built one stage, which is development. I have the QA stage that is pending. I have the production stage that is pending. We'll also make sure to build it. But once this is done, we'll go ahead and understand how to basically build truly a multi-stage pipeline. In here, I just have a build stage. I just have a deployment stage right now, and we'll see how it looks like further going further. Any questions still here, guys? Anyone? Anything? Any questions still here? Any questions, guys?
Yeah, one doubt. So
Mhm.
actually, I didn't attend last few classes, so I'm unable to
Okay.
connect in the dots. So now
Okay.
what we have achieved here, like we have created the infra, and we also deployed like a web server or something. Is there something that we are doing?
Yes. So we're building the infra. We are creating the infra, and on the created infra, we are pushing the code, and we are achieving all these things, or we're trying to achieve all these things using something known as a YAML pipeline. So
Okay,
earlier
so
we. Hmm?
yeah, please go on.
No, I was just telling that earlier we were coming with a classic wherein we were designing our pipeline. Now we are writing our pipeline, which is called pipeline as a code.
Okay, so even in general in real time also, like do we do all these things like together, or like these are all like different tasks?
No, these are together, like meaning depends upon what your project is using, whether a classic pipeline or a YAML pipeline. These are usually together,
You mean to say the classic pipeline and
uh, either classic or YAML. Like if it's
no,
classic, then you'll just go ahead and let's say design a pipeline, meaning you'll
okay.
add things to the pipeline. If it is YAML, you'll write it the way we did today.
No, my question is not that. My question is that
Mhm.
like the building infra and pushing the code, all these happen together or like different? That's what my question.
Okay, so yes, it will happen together. Like firstly,
Yeah,
we build the infrastructure and then go ahead and deploy the code on top of the infrastructure. It will happen together, yes.
got it. Thank you.
Okay, so now I have my pipeline stuck here. It's telling the pipeline needs three accesses to three environments. I mean, it needs some permissions out here. So let me look at what are the permissions that it needs. So it firstly needs to access the service connection. So I'll say permit. Secondly, it's waiting on a permission to go ahead and access an environment called development. I'll say permit. Thirdly, my pipeline needs to access the common library that we have. So I'll also do a permit here. So this is one-time activity that you do and the pipeline runs for the first time. This is what you do. You need to permit the pipeline to go ahead and let's say use the service connection, use the library out here, and also go ahead and use something known as the environment. So right now, it's now doing a deployment. It's trying to initialize a job. It will download the artifacts. So it'll try to do a download artifact out here. And finally, it'll try to go ahead and use the ARM template deployment. And it's now telling, okay, fine, I could not find the resource group called devrg. So I'll just go ahead and create one for me. And it'll do, or it'll try to, or it'll start basically going ahead and creating something called as a dev resource group. So after a couple of refreshes, you should be able to see something called as a devrg out here. So let me refresh, let me do a hard refresh out here. Okay, just taking some time today. So let's give some time out here. It's telling the resource group has been created successfully. Then it's going ahead and deploying my infrastructure, meaning creating my infrastructure there. So the infrastructure creation should have already been done. So I have a dev plan, and inside which I also will have something called as the dev web app. After that, it's taking the artifact and it is doing a deployment on the existing infrastructure that I just created earlier. So this is the end-to-end achievement what it's trying to do. So it's the same thing what we are trying to do, even in a classic pipeline, but we have now ported everything into a YAML pipeline out here, and we are doing a very simple, or we are doing a single environment build. This is a multi-stage pipeline with only one environment out here. So once this is done, let's go ahead and review the pipe. Let's go ahead and review our infrastructure changes that happened from this particular pipeline, and let's try to build a multi-stage pipeline out here. So this is done. So it's telling, okay, fine, development and etc. And one thing please observe here, guys, is that the download artifact is happening twice. Once by default, the pipeline downloads. The second time I went ahead and added a task called download the artifact. So this is something that we need to make sure to avoid. We'll also make sure to add a task to avoid that. Now, if I go into this one, I have the web app created. And if I just go ahead and browse my web application, I should get the .NET Core homepage, the default .NET Core homepage. So I have the .NET Core and it says this is my application and this is version 4 out here. So I have the default version. I have, let's say, this page getting displayed, which means my pipeline is working good enough. So let's just go ahead and review this pipeline once again. And let me see what is something that I need right now. So right now, this pipeline has two stages, one being our build, the other being our deployment to dev. These are the two stages that I do have out here right now. So let me do an edit again. And let me collapse the build stage. This is good enough for me. Development stage is good, but there's one thing that is happening, which is the download artifacts is happening twice. So now to avoid that, I'll just add one more flag here inside, let's say before the task begins. I'll say download, I'll say none. So even before my step or even before my task, all these begin. I'll just give a flag called download none so that it will stop downloading the artifact uh, the way it does. So this now is the deployment to dev. This is an entire stage which goes ahead and deploys my code to dev. So what I'll do, I'll just copy the entire thing. Since I use this, I'll just copy this entire thing. And let me get my cursor back here. Let me collapse the stage. I'm just placing my cursor under the stage, pasting it again. So I'm pasting the development again. And now I'll call this as QA. In here, the deployment is the same, the pool is the same. The display name will be QA. The environment will be QA. The library is also going to change. So if I go back into my libraries, I have another library for I have another library for QA called common library QA. So I'm using this library instead of the dev. Strategy is the same. Everything else remains the same. I'm not doing any changes to my pipeline out here. Everything else remains the same. And I can add one more stage here for my production environment. So whatever I copied, again, I'll just do a simple copy again. Make sure my cursor is in the right place. So I'll just collapse everything. Is the production stage out here. And I'll now change the variable called, or this name is called prod. And let's say this display name is prod, not QA. Environment again is prod. This variable group also changes. So if I go back into my library, I have a variable group for production. This common library hyphen prod. So instead of QA, I'll say this is prod. And the rest all remains the same. So the challenge is only to add the first stage. The rest all I'm not even bothering about it. I'm just going in and doing a copy and just changing a couple of variables to go ahead and make sure this is reusable. And I am done. This is what I'm doing right now. So I'll now save it out. I'll say added multiple phases or multiple stages. Now give it a run. And now I have a multi-stage YAML release pipeline wherein I have a build, I have a development, I have a QA, I have a production. So whatever that I did using the classic editor. So in the classic editor, I went ahead and separately created my build pipeline, separately created my release pipeline. Whatever I did in my classic, I made sure to do the same thing in YAML, but in a bit modular way. Meaning, this is the current trend that is running on right now in the industry, and a lot of organizations are choosing this approach because of the portability and the advantages we were talking about. And this is called a multi-stage YAML release pipeline, wherein we are going ahead and creating multiple stages within the same pipeline and reusing a single stage. Meaning, I just took an effort while creating the development stage. That's it. So I just did a bit of effort while creating the development. The rest all, I just went ahead and copied and pasted it. And I just made little differences for the display name, for let's say the variable group that's being used, and etc. So it's going into, let's say, the development. It's doing the same thing in the development, and it'll go into the QA, it'll go into the prod. It'll do the same thing what we did in our classic pipeline, guys. Any questions till here? Anyone? Any questions till here? And I will make sure after this class that I give you this entire pipeline definition so that you can use this as a reference while you are starting to build out. Now, my request again, guys, is please practice it. This is only pure practice. If you're just listening to the class and not practicing it, guys, you won't follow. So please practice this out and make sure that you do this effectively. Make sure that you go ahead and do this effectively. So right now, if you see, I added a flag called download none. So I'm only getting one phase called download the artifacts. And once it's downloading, it'll go ahead do the RM template deployment, then do the web app deployment. Finally, come to QA. Do the same thing in QA. It'll create a different environment for me in QA and etc. And same thing it'll do in prod. This is what will happen with the end-to-end release right now. So right now it's done with development. It is waiting for my approval for the QA. The same thing. So I'll just say permit and I'll just say permit. This will happen for the first time. So now it'll go into the QA stage. It will do the same thing that I did in the development. It'll go ahead, create your infrastructure, then release the code onto the infrastructure. It'll do again the same thing in production as well. So this is what an end-to-end pipeline is right now doing for me. Any questions that I can take, guys? Are you all following this? Yes, no, maybe. Guys, I need some input from your end because if you're not giving me, so I won't be able to understand whether you're following or not. Guys, anyone?
Yes, Kiran.
Okay, so now it's trying to do an ARM deployment and it's now trying to create a QA RG right now. So this was the development RG, and if I just refresh the screen, I'll have a QA RG inside which now it's creating the app service plan, and it'll also go ahead and create the app service. And once that's done, it'll go ahead and do a web application deployment there. And finally, it'll move into the production phase. So this is done. So this is doing the web application deployment, and then it's going to move into the production phase here. So this is what it's doing. This is what the pipeline is trying to do end to end. It's trying to go ahead and, let's say, build your applications, deploy your applications, and so on and so forth. So let's give it 2 more minutes so that the production also will get completed. But one thing here that I'm missing on, guys, is that in my classic pipeline, when I built my classic pipeline, let's say this is my classic pipeline out here, going from one environment to the other, meaning I said, okay, fine, I want this environment, and finally I want to go to this particular environment, and so on and so forth. When I was going from one environment to the other, I went ahead and I declared something called as the pre and post deployment approvers. I have a pre and I have a post deployment approvers as well. In YAML, however, it's a little tricky to declare the post deployment approvers. So let's park it for now. And let's understand how do you do a pre-deployment approver here. Meaning in this entire pipeline, I do not have any option to go ahead and declare the pre-deployment approvers. So how do I do that? What do we do to in order to make sure to have the approvers and etc. Let's also look at that. So this pipeline is done. It's waiting on production. So let me go ahead and give an approval for the production. And once this is done, the production stage will also start. And once the production is complete, we'll try to understand how do you go ahead and give something known as the approvals out here. So right now I have a dev and a QA RG. It will create something called as a prod RG for me right now. And after it creates the prod RG for me, I'll just go ahead and deploy the code there. So it's downloading the artifact. It's doing the ARM template deployment. And finally, it's doing a web app code release there. And once this is done, let's go ahead and start giving approvals out here. Let's go ahead and get approvers in place so that the code, which when moving from one phase to the other, will go through the right approval channel. That's what we need. That's what I intend to do right now. So once this is done, let's look into that. So right now I have a prod RG also coming in, and after some time, you will be able to see that my deployment right now is successful. This should create something called as a prod web application and a prod plan. So it went ahead and successfully created the prod web application, the prod plan, and then it's going ahead and doing a code deployment out here. So I have now a multi-stage YAML pipelines, but the pipeline is still not complete because I do not have the approvers yet. So once the approvers are included, that's when my pipeline will be end to end. So we'll also look at how to get in approvers, what to do to get in approvers, and etc. Let's give 2 more minutes here to go ahead and get done with, let's say, the deployment. And let's come back and revisit our pipeline back again. And this is important, guys. I mean, this is something that you will be doing in your job role. Classic, yes, in the projects that are already using Classic, you will need this. So that's the reason we began with Classic and we went into YAML. And this stands done. So let me recheck my pipeline and let me see where I need to introduce something known as approvers out here. Now, this is how my pipeline looks like. Again, it's a code building. Then from here to here, meaning on the development also, I need something like an approvers. I need someone to come here and approve the code. I need someone to approve the code when it's going in. That's the reason I use something known as an environment called development. I use something called as an environment called QA and an environment like production. So what are these environments? Why did I even use that? This is why I used it. And that's the reason I'll go into something known as environments out here. There is something called as an environments here. I'll go into this one called environments now. These are the 3 environments that got created just now when my pipeline got triggered. So 20 minutes ago, because we started it at 7. So I created 3 different environments called development, prod, and QA. And if I go into these environments, for example, if I go into the development, there is these 3 buttons in the top, which is called more actions. I'll go here and I'll say approvers and checks. This is where I'll start giving approvers. So I'll say approvals, I'll say next, and I'll just add one of the approval here and I'll say please check the code before it is deployed. So I'm adding approvers to all my environments. Here instead of production, I can just go ahead and add an approver. So I'm adding the approvers using this particular environment out here, and I will say approval, say create, and I'll also add an approver for my prod stage. So 3 stages, 3 different approvers. Why did I come into security? Not security, but approvers here. Let me go to approvers and checks. Let's add, let's say approvers next. And I'll just add myself here. Say approval. So I added approvers right now. Now if I re-trigger my pipeline, just could not find the YAML pipeline. Let's do a refresh. Okay, encounters could not find the valid YAML pipeline. Okay, it's trying to look at the main branch. So let me take the develop branch out here and let me run this out. Okay, now it's trying to do a build, and after it does a build, it will come here and it will wait for my approval. It will ask for my approval explicitly, and it will say, okay, fine, please go ahead and give an approval here so that I can go inside the development phase. So before going into the development, it's going to ask for an approval. Before going into the QA, it's going to ask for an approval. Before going to prod, it's going to ask for an approval. This is how I'm getting the approvers in by using a concept called environments that I have introduced when creating the pipeline. So I said, okay, fine, we'll discuss about what environments is. This is what environments are. This is the use case scenario of an environment wherein I can go ahead, declare multiple environments, and I can have approvers for each and every environment. Now see, it's waiting for this one. It says 0 out of 1 check passed. And the wait here is because that someone needs to come ahead and give an approval here. This is the person for which it is waiting. It's saying, okay, fine, I want this person to come explicitly and go ahead and give the approval. And once I log into that account and I give the approval, I'll just go ahead deploy it. It'll do the same thing for QA, and for production, it'll wait for my approval out here. So these are the things. So these are the things it's trying to do. And this is how we get something called as an approval out here. So I can also say view the approval, and this person has to basically, let's say, come here and they have to basically go ahead and do the approval out there. So this is how the end-to-end pipeline is designed, guys. So any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here? Anyone, anything, any questions? And also I'll go ahead and paste this entire pipeline, paste this entire pipeline definition into a different project. So I'll just do a control C and a control V there so that you all can start using it. Let's say YAML, and I'll just give into this particular file called YAML demo. So I've pasted my entire pipeline definition so that you can go ahead and use this out. And this is the file that I'll just give it to you all. I'll just share it to you all in the chat. So you can take it, and while you are practicing, please go ahead and review this out. Please go ahead and refer to this so that you can start building an end-to-end pipeline, guys. And this is important to do again and again. I'm again and again telling this. The reason being, YAML is something that's being used right now. YAML is picking up a lot of momentum, and even when you're, let's say in the later classes when you're starting to study about Kubernetes and etc., even those applications use YAML. So please go ahead and make sure to practice it and make sure to come up with as many as routes as you can, so that I can help you all with the I can help you all with the same thing. Okay, any questions before I close, guys? Anyone, any questions before we close? Anything, guys?
Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, in classic editors, we'll be having pre-approval and post-approval. Now in this YAML, we are only having one-time approval.
It's a pre-approval. Yes, you do not have a post-approval concept in YAML. You need to add something known as a manual intervention. There's a task called manual intervention, meaning if you want to basically go ahead and add a post-approval here, let's say after the stage called build, after the stage called, sorry, development. So if I can come here and just give you a basic idea, I'm not adding this right now. I'm just telling what you can do here. I can say a stage. I can say post deployment or post dev. This is the name of the stage that I need. And I can start adding things like, the display name, variables, the pool, and etc. And I need to add a task called manual approval or manual intervention or manual validation. These are this is the task that I need to add here, and add something called as a post deployment approver. So I'm giving you an idea. I want you all to try it out on how do you add this, and for this you need to read a documentation. So I want you all to try doing this out in your pipelines. Make sure you try it out. In a couple of days I'll go ahead and also give the definition for it, but please try it out on how do you add a manual intervention out here which can act as a post deployment approval. So post deployment approval is not a straightforward, let's say, demand in, or not a straightforward task in YAML. You need to make sure to add these tasks out here, and adding these tasks needs a little bit different approach. So that's the reason I want you all to just look at this particular task, understand what it's trying to do, and let me know how did you add this out. Is that okay?
So,
Any more questions here, guys? Let me discard this. Let me say reload. Any questions before I close, guys? Any questions before we close for today? Okay, then have a great day ahead, guys, and we'll meet tomorrow. And from tomorrow, we will be starting with Terraform, so which is very again important concept. And the entire week is going to be about Terraform. So starting tomorrow, the entire week we're going to cover what Terraforms are, how do you play around with Terraform, and so on and so forth, and how do you use Terraforms with something called as Azure DevOps. So we'll look at all these things out. All these concepts are something that we'll cover out. Thank you, guys, and have a great day ahead.